So our next presenter is actually pre-recorded. This is Andrea Soros Calcutta. Sorry if I butchered your name. I do apologize. And then we also have Alexandria Ullman. Ms. Ullman is a lawyer and psychologist trained at PUC-RJ and is a specialist in family law, mainly in cases of parental alienation and false allegations of sexual abuse. Ms. Calcutta is a clinical and forensic psychologist expert of the Court of Justice of the State of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And she's also a forensic technical assistant in the family and criminal courts throughout Brazil. She has a master's in conflict resolution systems from the Federal University in Argentina.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to talk to you about the evaluation of accusations of child sexual abuse in Brazil, evolutions, setbacks, and difficulties. I am Andrea Calçada, a clinical and forensic psychologist, expert in family court in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, forensic technical assistant in family and criminal courts in all Brazilian states. I work with parental alienation in Brazil since 1996, the first author in co-authorship to approach the subject in the country. I wrote the first book on the subject of false accusations of sexual abuse in the context of family litigation in the country in 2001. Nowadays, my book named Irreparable Losses, Parental Alienation, and False Accusations of Sexual Abuse is revised and amplified, and it's already on the third edition. I have published articles in the family law area and also in related topics. I am master in conflict resolution systems from the Federal University of Lomas de Zamora in Argentina. I am a forensic expert trainer at Rio de Janeiro Court of Law and a psychodiagnosis expert trainer. About the accusations of sexual abuse in familiar contexts, it arises as a great challenge for professionals involved in the protection of children and adolescents and family relationships in family courts. Here in Brazil, we have a great dichotomy observed regarding the posture of professionals who work in police stations, the Child and Adolescent Protection Network, and criminal courts. For those who work in family courts, it's a great difference because professionals who work in police stations and criminal courts, they focus on the search of the occurrence of sexual abuse without analyzing the context. Child reports abuse, so the abuse occurred, like a linear understanding. The child reports and the professional believes that the abuse occurred. And differently in family courts, professionals tend to analyze the context. But also there is a risk sometimes of contaminating the look by family litigation, parental alienation, and intentional false allegations of child sexual abuse. We had a great changes after the Brazilian parental alienation law in 2010, when judges and professionals tended to analyze the context with a different looking about these accusations. Even today in Brazil, Brazil does not have a concrete data for assessing the number of false accusations of sexual abuse in the country. We have some researchers about the theme, and I will tell you some data. For example, Amêndola in 2009 at the State University of Rio de Janeiro about the performance of professional psychologists in case of evaluation, assessment of accusations of sexual abuse, detected some important conclusions. In many cases, accused parents were excluded from the evaluation, revealing a model of social exclusion. B. Reports with exclusions made a difference in the result, supporting court decisions and promoting separation between parents and children. C. Professionals have difficulty realizing the existence of false accusation of sexual abuse. They didn't realize that at that time. D. The evaluation model that privileges the child's word excludes the father and presumes the accusation as true. Disclosure interview premise that the child is a victim of abuse. Inappropriate model in false reports. It excludes the participation of the accused father, procedural data, and favors the action of the alienator through alienments or strong established bonds with the child. The model that interviews all family members, in addition to the child, generates differences in the evaluation results. The result of the research echoes the subject point out as the biggest factor of distortion within the processes, especially in family courts that time, the lack of knowledge and lack of preparation of professionals. We have another researcher in Brazil, Maria Valéria de Oliveira Correia Magalhães, from Recife, Pernambuco, a state from northeast of Brazil. And she pointed out in 10 processes identified with the phenomenon of parental alienation in 2 family courts in Recife, which made up in the final sample of the study 40% of the total accusations of child sexual were falsely denouncing sexual violence against the parents. So 40% on the total of child sexual accusations, in the total of the accusations of sexual abuse in children were false. And against one parent, family members, or grandparents to prevent or hinder their coexistence with the victim. It was found that the majority, 70% of the victims, were aged between 3 and 11 years old, 50% of whom were female and 50 male. The professional, in addition to being theoretically and technically grounded to carry out such an investigation, needs to manage his emotions and beliefs on the subject in order to carry out an impartial psychological assessment. When such an assessment takes place outside the justice, the professional probably does not have such training, generating risks for him, the family, and the child involved. Pellizzoli and Delaglio in 2016 about the psychologist's decision-making in child sexual abuse are the opinion of, although knowledge about the dynamics and the signs and symptoms is necessary, professionals should not consider any aspect in isolation, such as confirming the occurrence of abuse. It's also desirable that the questions and interviews are not directed in such a way as to exclude other possible outcomes for the case. Awareness of personal biases is critical in conducting ASI assessments. In addition to always listening and evaluating everyone involved, in the case of accusations of abuse, due to the complexity and difficulty and their effects on the child, decision-making TD can benefit from checklists that structure it, such as the IFED phrase inventory, which aims to help identify and confirm the phenomenon of domestic violence and the child sexual behavior inventory. Sunny, 2017, describes that psychological examinations involve access to multiple sources like parents, children, and other significant ones. Various methodologies like interviews, observation, application of instruments, document analysis of the legal process, and other relevant elements, and the analysis of the problem through its various aspects: family dynamics, parenting, educational practice, and general adjustment, so that the created report can support judicial decisions. In informal research present in Calçada, 2014, in process between 2000 and 2013, whose accusations of sexual abuse were judged to be false, it was verified that few were the professionals who used appropriately the techniques and psychological resources in the investigation process. The resolution of the Federal Council of Psychology at that time for the structuring of psychological documents was rarely used by professionals, contrary to what the resolution itself required. Most based the diagnosis on the report of the child and the alienating parent, without contextualizing and listening to the accused. In most cases, there was no investigation into the possibility of contamination of the child's reports. There was also no comparison between the different reports of the children during the process. In almost 100% of the cases, there was no contextualization of the accusation. Few professionals evaluated the alienator and the accused. The necessary impartiality and neutrality were not found in most professionals. The need to assess the accused's personality and associate the profile of people who commit sexual crimes against children found in the literature was not included. The assessment of the accuser and other people involved, the diagnosis of the alienator, was rarely carried out. Misdiagnosis based on symptoms has been encountered with alarming frequency. The use of evaluation criteria for parental alienation was rarely found in the testimonies. The motivation for the accusation found in most cases was affective revenge due to the end of the relationship, which should deserve attention for a possible tendency for the alienation to distort the facts. Child in psychotherapy before the court decision can jeopardize the investigation. What? Child in psychotherapy before the court decision can jeopardize the investigation, as we saw in previous chapters. Professionals should question themselves about cultural beliefs such as children don't lie, mothers are always good, mother's love is unconditional. They should know and delve deeper into parental alienation, child sexual abuse, and other family dynamics. Knowledge in child development, psychopathology, and psychological assessments are preponderant. The differential diagnosis in this case is an important factor in differentiating the abusive dynamic. Therefore, the fundamental question is the training of professionals in this area. There are some points that must be understood. They need to contextualize the accusation within the family history and the documents in the process. That all people involved needed to be heard. When assessing the child, there are specific approach techniques necessary directly approaching the subject at some point, but in an open, non-inductive way. It's necessary to know that the child's reports need to be understood within the context and not in isolation. It's necessary to investigate whether the child's speech has the child's reports has consistency and coherence. Do not base the diagnosis on symptoms. The history of approaching the child about sexual abuse is a priority. Child suggestibility and false memories are a special topic to be understood by professionals. The child should not be referred to psychotherapy as if abused without a final sentence. Professionals should question themselves about cultural beliefs such as children don't lie, mothers are always good, mother loves unconditional. They should know and deepen their understanding of parental alienation and other family dynamics. It's essential to psychologically evaluate the people involved. The importance of working as a team so that the evaluation is more comprehensive. Sexual abuse or false accusations of sexual abuse, truth or lie, the differential diagnosis. We need to verify the family culture about sexuality as well as possible and exposures to sexual contents in different ways. We need to be involved in the case as early as possible, question the motivation of people who have spoken to the child before. Start with the children. Whatever the child brings spontaneously, only after this step we have to ask direct questions. Never enter information that was not provided by the child, and above all, be very careful, be aware of yourself and your counter-transference as an evaluator. Use the criteria for differential diagnosis of false accusations of child sexual abuse. Be aware of and obtain as much information about the child, the circumstance of the first disclosure, or as close as possible to it, who the child has spoken to, the child's behaviors and development prior to the investigation, and the possibility of prior incidents or suspects. We have always to have a mute-faced understanding. We have to look around all the ways and understandings. We have to understand the timeline of the processes and the family history, and in which time occurred the accusation of child sexual abuse in this timeline. Forensic psychological evaluation on child sexual abuse allegations needs to consider several possibilities. It must be handcrafted. And here in Brazil, we can see before and after the Brazilian parental alienation law some changes. after the law, before the law and after the law, we had changes in the way judges looked for accusations of sexual abuse in children, and they could look to family litigation and the occurrence of false accusations. But now, with the movements against the law, we had a retrocess in the evaluation and the assessments of this type of cases in family courts. And the interventions and judicial determinations also based on the law had after the Brazilian parental alienation law, there were changes. After the law, the judges could see the false accusations in family litigation, and interventions and determinations based on the law could be done. But now, with the movements against the law here in Brazil, we had a retrocess in the evaluation, in the assessment of this type of cases in family courts. It's really not good, but we professionals, psychologists, lawyers, we are trying to make the law survive the politics and the questions that around all over the world against parental alienation. And thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed my speech.